On the counter lay the staff list. First line, my name, marked ice, trash, kitchen. The manager nodded at a bucket. He said, "Table 6. I took it. My mother Sarah walked in through the main doors and smiled at the coordinator. My father David checked the seating cards and called a waiter to a stain. My brother Mark raised a glass near the stage and didn't see me. Me, the corridor. Them, the lights. Guests inside, staff behind the curtain," said the host. Crystal rang across the tables, near our station, thin disposable cups. Badge lower. The administrator fixed the clip on my collar. Sarah slid the card, Mark, into the center and looked pleased. David held the door with his shoulder, for strangers, not for me. I dropped the ice at table 6 and returned without extra words. In a week their guest bracelets will mean nothing. Hot dishes went to them. Errands came to me. Mark got the toasts. I got containers. Someone filmed me on their phone and hid the screen. I didn't ask them to delete it. Enough to remember how it looked. Hard to watch Mark get attention while I carried buckets. Me, a tray and gloves sticking to my wrist. Them, glass, center, names on cards. That evening I came back to my room near Fair Park. The lamp clicked and buzzed, the AC shook like a bus. The fridge droned in the corner, not even trying to be quiet. I set a disposable cup of water on the table and fixed the moment. Let them stay silent. Silence files everything into folders. I kept receipts in a shoebox. McDonald's from February 12th, next to a 7-Eleven coffee. On top lay Walmart, March 14th, 9:16 p.m. On the back, the time in pen. No comments. Facts don't need adjectives. This won't end with their laughter. It will end with my word. On Sundays my grandmother Ruth brought a box from Shipley. 2 donuts and 1 Kolach, the paper still warm. She didn't ask about Sarah or David, only if I was eating. She looked at my hands and said, "They hold steady." She stacked the quarters by size, 25 separate. Sometimes she pushed the pile closer. I pushed it back. At night, the kitchen and the grill. By day, delivery, catering jobs. The smell of degreaser clung to my sleeves until dark. Receipts from Wells Fargo with dates lay between order slips. When the grill went quiet, I drew on guest checks. Parking stripes, back doors, narrow truck bays. Most ended in the trash, a few into the shoebox. My Uncle John came once a month and ordered black coffee. He looked at the lines for a long time, then nodded. "This pays later," he said once, never saying when. He put a flat key on the table, a scratch on the tooth. "Don't rush. You'll open it when you need to." On a card he wrote, "Your true inheritance is your talent." I slid the card behind the Walmart receipt and closed my wallet. One afternoon, on break, I called my mother Sarah. The rings were steady, then cut off with nothing. I called my father David. The line sighed and died. The vending machine ate my dollar and gave nothing. I wrote the time on the back of a receipt. That was enough. By the end of the month their folder will be just another box. At night the road smelled of hot concrete and cleaning fluid. The Buc-ee's sign shone into my face like a forgotten headlight. I repeated the line on John's card, not for courage, for order. In the library I flipped through art school pamphlets. The prices stood like doors with passes I didn't have. I straightened the edges and put the booklets back. Sarah liked when everything was straight. Even what was already straight. I remembered how she looked through me, pretending to read. In the kitchen the register spit out tape, and I tore the end. The coffee pot burned down to bitterness and stayed there. Sometimes I dictated the time and street into my pocket recorder. It shook once and went silent. That was enough. When Ruth fell ill, I heated water in the family lounge. The foam lid bent. The tea smelled like chemicals. Ruth squeezed my finger with her thumb and said, "Keep the facts." I kept the hospital parking receipt dated June 12, 7:42 p.m. I laid it in the shoebox with the rest. When Ruth was gone, John stood in the hallway in silence. He looked at my shoes. He said, "They're holding." I said, "They'll last." He took out the key. The metal was warm, the scratch caught my skin. He said, "It's time." That was enough. In the hall they will say one word. That word will be mine. That evening I laid on the table what I had. The key. A folded McDonald's wrapper. One sketch of a parking lot. The card with the lines sat in my wallet near a photo. I spoke every name: Sarah, David, John, Ruth, Emily. I hadn't met Emily yet, but the name had to be spoken. I slid a fresh receipt under the key and smoothed the edge with my finger. The fridge clicked, the lamp flickered, the room went attentive. The key tapped the table once. I didn't look away. From this paper their silence will begin. The pump flashed, "See cashier," after the first swipe. I wiped the card on my sleeve and went inside. 3 people in line, eyes on the lottery screen. A man behind me sighed. His keys rattled once. The clerk didn't look up when I said good morning. He tapped the register and said, "Try again over here." I slid the card. The screen blinked and stayed stubborn. I paid the difference with quarters from the glove box. The receipt was warm and thin, ink already fading. A lid cracked at the rim when I pressed it down. Before noon, this small thing will matter. Public, not private. Not fancy. Enough. I stepped out with coffee and a cheap breakfast sandwich. The air smelled like gasoline, fryer oil, and hot rubber. My old Ford started on the 3rd turn of the key. The 7-Eleven cup wobbled in the plastic holder. AM radio gave me tires, interest rates, then static. The passenger seat held a shoebox, slips, and sketches. The top sketch showed a narrow ramp with clean lines. No ornaments. Just use. I pulled onto the service road by habit and time. Warehouse docks already buzzed. Forklifts chirped in reverse. Cardboard dust lifted in the light and stayed suspended. I signed a clipboard with a pen on a cracked string. The guard stamped the time and waved me through. Not loud. Precise. Degreaser hung in the air near the loading bay. Gloves stuck to my wrists when I pulled them on. A manager pointed with a chin, not with a hand. "Slide those to the wall. Leave the aisle open." I slid them. He said nothing else. That was enough. Someone dropped a tape gun. It clattered across the floor. I stacked empties flush, edges square, corners aligned. Work first. Then everything else. The break room microwave hummed and clicked, then gave up. My coffee had coasted down to lukewarm at the edge. I ate a sandwich that was warm only in the middle. A poster said, "Think safety," in a color that faded. The sink smelled like bleach and a little metal. I wrote the time on the back of the receipt. I folded it once and slid it into a clear sleeve. Small things in straight lines. Late morning pushed heat against the dock doors. I opened the sketch pad on a crate and checked angles. Parking hash marks, curb cut, drain grate, truck swing path. Pencil didn't tremble. The page stayed flat and honest. I added the cross street in the corner, block letters. Order pays later. I drove across town to John's gallery before lunch. The room held cold air and quiet like a decision. A fan clicked like a metronome set to patience. John looked at my hands, not my face, then nodded. "You need better sleeves," he said, plain and even. He slid a stack of acid-free folders across the table. "Receipt to receipt. Sketch to sketch," he said. I filled them without asking for labels or headings. He watched the edges align and didn't add extra words. He tapped a small storage box. "Keep originals apart." I set the shoebox down and moved the stacks over. The key caught a stripe of light and held it. The key knows direction. So do I. By evening, this date will belong to the paper. Back on the road, the sun leaned hard on the glass. Traffic slowed near the park where I sometimes cut through. A girl laughed too loud, helmet shining in the light. 2 adults walked a step apart, steady and practiced. I knew the walk before I knew the faces. Sarah looked past the jogger like he wasn't there. David checked a message and never broke pace. The girl lifted her arms for balance and kept laughing. I didn't roll down the window or call a name. I watched the crosswalk count down to 0 and turned right. People keep their patterns. I keep the time. I stopped at a Wells Fargo for change and small bills. Inside was cold enough to make the paper feel stiff. A teller counted 20s without looking at her hands. A manager smiled at someone with a sharper suit. I counted 10s in the lobby and wrote the amount. I slid the 2 slips into sleeves, corners clean. Soon, the date on this slip will carry weight. At the next site, a badge peeled at one corner. Reception said, 1 minute, and stretched it into 5. An elevator button sank and didn't spring back up. A man covered his cough with 2 fingers and a laugh. I delivered to a room with lights too bright to need. A signature curved like smoke and barely held together. I set the fresh receipt under a sketch and moved on. Strangers sign fast. Mine will last. The day held its shape without my help or complaint. By late afternoon, cardboard dust had settled in my cuffs. Degreaser lingered on my hands even after 2 rinses. I rolled the sleeves once and left them that way. The radio gave up and turned itself into quiet. I parked under a thin tree that didn't offer shade. The cup holder clutched a second 7-Eleven water. The cap clicked once. That was enough. Nothing extra. Only useful. I stopped by a strip of stores to return a dolly. Outside the dry cleaner, a boy filmed a prank and missed. He looked at me, then at his phone, then away. I held the door for a woman carrying too many hangers. She said thanks without meeting my eyes. That was fine. I wiped tape residue off my fingers with an old receipt. I kept the peace. It still had the time I needed. Keep the small things straight. Dusk found me before I found home. The lamp by the door chose to turn on and stay brave. The outlet hummed a thin, steady line into the quiet. I cleared the table and washed my hands twice. Sleeves on the left, sleeves on the right, nothing loose. Receipts together, dates on the back, cross streets in ink. Sketches together, no curls, no smudges, corners aligned. Photos by date in a folder, no fancy names, just numbers. The key on top, metal cool and settled. Not dramatic. It works. I opened the sketch with the narrow ramp again. I added a small note about the drain and the grade. My wrist stayed steady, the page stayed obedient. I slid it back into a sleeve and pressed the edge. I wrote the time on the outside and underlined once. Patience earns interest. I took out John's card and touched the crease. Your true inheritance is your talent, the line said. I didn't recite it. I let it sit where it belonged. Wallet closed. Card behind a Walmart slip. Everything had a place. Everything kept its place. By morning, a quiet box will matter more than a loud room. I tried a call I knew wouldn't change anything. No answer. No callback. No message left behind. The hallway microwave whined, clicked, and admitted defeat. The fridge growled once and settled into a lower hum. The room made the sounds of a room that remembered me. I slid the last sleeve into the shoebox and squared it. I pressed the lid down and counted to 3. The lid tapped. The key answered. That was all I needed tonight. The security guard lifted the rope for the couple ahead. He dropped it when I stepped forward and pointed to the kiosk. Take a number, he said, eyes already past my shoulder. A bell chimed. The door opened again without resistance. Sarah walked in with a tabbed folder pressed to her chest. David moved behind her, phone to his ear, not slowing. Mark smiled into his screen and nodded at the receptionist. They were waved past the rope with a small, practiced gesture. I held my ticket and watched the red digits climb. Public, not private. By next week, these numbers will speak louder than names. The scanner at security chirped at a man with loose change. A basket of plastic trays sat cracked along the rim. I emptied my pockets and slid the key into the tray. The conveyor motor whined like a tired fan and kept turning. The deputy nodded once and pushed my things toward the rollers. I put the key back where it belonged and kept moving. Not fancy. Enough. The seating row along the wall was hard and honest. A laminated sign explained copy fees by the page an hour. A child kicked his backpack twice and then stopped. The overhead speaker called numbers without emotion or apology. Light from the high windows made paper look thinner than skin. Paper first. A nameplate read A. Ramirez. Fingers hovered over a keyboard. My number blinked. I stood and set the ticket on the counter. What are we pulling? Ramirez asked, steady voice, steady eyes. Records for John, I said, and gave the gallery address. Ramirez typed like time was dependable and didn't need reminders. Deeds, a memo of bequest, storage notations, she said. All of them, I said. Clear, with legible edges. Ramirez didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth moved. She turned the monitor slightly and pressed print. Not loud. Precise. The copier woke with heat and a low breath. First page came out warm, date sharp, John's full name intact. Second page outlined a lot number with plain coordinates. Third page held a signature that didn't wobble or apologize. Toner dust dried on my fingers like chalk that wouldn't smear. A stapler clicked twice. The stacks sat square on the counter. Ramirez slid them forward with a flat palm and waited. Facts travel farther than speeches. I counted bills for copies, coins for the stamp machine. The stamp machine thudded once and left a clean date. Ramirez folded the receipt and handed it across the glass. I put the receipt into a clear sleeve and pressed the edge. Behind me, shoes squeaked, someone cleared a throat and went quiet. I stepped aside so the next number could own the space. Small things in straight lines. In the hallway, I saw them again near a frosted door. Sarah aligned her tabs until they made a single stripe. David held the handle for a stranger and didn't turn back. Mark lowered his phone long enough to catch his reflection. The stranger thanked David. The door closed soft behind them. No one held the door when I reached it a breath later. I let it close, then moved along the wall toward the stairs. Everyone kept their roles. At the end of the corridor, a clerk's window sold envelopes. The attendant didn't speak, she slid a pack under the slot. Clear plastic with a ridged side, acid-free and stiff. I paid exact and wrote the time on the back of the slip. The pen skipped once on the slick counter, and then behaved. Soon, the date on this slip will do the talking. Outside, heat sat heavy on the courthouse steps. I walked 2 blocks to the UPS store on the corner. The bell over the door rang once. No one looked up. A small sign said, Notary on duty, M. Carter. Carter wore reading glasses on a cord and no jewelry. Do you want these sewn? She asked, voice steady, no smile. Yes, I said. Threaded and stamped, 1 extra full copy. She threaded the awl through tiny pre-punched holes. The thread bit, pulled, and laid flat without fraying. Her date stamp landed once, clean and final, no bounce. She wrote her commission number in neat square numbers. I paid with a card. The receipt slid warm into my hand. I put it into a sleeve behind the notary page and pressed. Simple. Tight. Enough. Outside smelled like hot asphalt and box glue. I stood under the thin shade of a pole that wasn't a tree. A delivery truck idled too long, and then shut off. The quiet that followed felt like a floor settling. I opened the stack on the tailgate and checked edges. Pages faced the same way. Staples flat. No corners bent. Order pays later. Back through the lobby, I took the stairs by the rail. A maintenance cart rattled. A wheel thumped on a seam. Someone laughed into a phone and then swallowed the sound. I passed a bulletin board with public notices and old tape. One flyer hung by a corner and managed not to fall. I wrote the time again on the sleeve and kept moving. Not dramatic. It works. On the ground floor, a clerk in a badge asked for surveys. Should have gotten them upstairs, he said, not unkind, not kind. I pointed to the sewn copy and the notary stamp. He looked once, nodded once, and said, You're fine. That was all the talk the hallway needed. Talk was decoration. Paper wasn't. When I reached the doors, a group paused to take pictures. A woman fixed her hair in the glass and stepped aside. The sun hit the metal trim and threw a narrow stripe. The stripe climbed up my sleeve and found the key. The nick in the tooth caught light and held it. The key kept its job. Noon came and went while I crossed to the lot. A 7-Eleven sign pulsed across the street like a metronome. Inside, coffee was fresh for once and actually hot. I bought water and a plain cup to chase the heat. The lid clicked on the second try and stayed put. A clerk named Diaz counted scratch-offs without raising his head. I folded the second receipt and slid it into a sleeve. The cup sweated rings onto the counter. I wiped them. Nothing extra. Only useful. The afternoon sights sat along a service road near the airport. An elevator button sank under my thumb and didn't spring back. Reception stretched, 1 minute, into 5 without any apology. A man signed with a flourish that didn't help the letters. I watched the line wobble and wrote the time anyway. The air smelled like copier toner and someone's too strong cologne. I set the new receipt under the notary copy and left. Strangers signed fast. Mine would last. Back at John's gallery, the door sighed but didn't protest. Cool air met me, honest and without perfume. The fan in the corner clicked every third sweep. John looked at my hands first, and then at the stack. He traced the notary stamp with his eyes and not his finger. "This is how you do it," he said. "First facts, then talking." I nodded and set the sewn copy on the table edge. He didn't touch it, he watched how it sat. He slid a small brown box toward me without explanation. "Keep originals apart," he said, eyes still on my wrists. I moved the piles the way he wanted and didn't argue. The key lay on the table. The light stripe found it again. I didn't need applause. I needed edges square. By late afternoon, the streets took on the color of heat. AM radio tried a tire ad and then decided on silence. I drove home with the window open a hand's width. Cardboard dust shook out of my cuffs and settled on the floor mat. The shoebox on the passenger seat didn't slide on turns. Everything inside had weight now, not guesses. Weight, not noise. At home, the outlet hummed a thin, steady line. The lamp flicked once and chose to stay alive. I washed my hands and dried them on a clean towel. The table cleared with one slow sweep of my arm. I laid today's stack down and opened the envelopes. Receipts on the left, dates on the back, cross streets in ink. Copies on the right, staples flat, corners aligned outward. Notary pages in the center, thread knots facing down. Photos by date in a folder with numbers and nothing pretty. I pressed each sleeve edge once with the pad of my thumb. Small pressure. Big effect. I wrote times again where they belong. I matched the Wells Fargo slip to the courthouse total. I checked the sewn copy against the unsewn one, page by page. No adjectives anywhere. Only numbers and proper names. The room sounded like a clock that had decided to rest. Somewhere on the landing, a shoe squeaked and then stopped. By tomorrow, someone will ask for copies I already made. I opened the wallet and touched John's card by reflex. "Your true inheritance is your talent," the line had said. I didn't read it out loud, I let it rest. The card slid behind a Walmart slip and disappeared like it should. The key took its place on top of the newest pile. Metal cooled the paper underneath without leaving a mark. I kept the order and the order kept me. I put 2 extra sleeves into the brown box for later. I labeled nothing on the outside and everything inside. I stacked the box beneath the table, not on a shelf. The shelf would take it, but the floor was better now. Lower. Safer. Less noticed when people looked for drama. Lower was smarter. I sat on the bed edge and counted 5 slow breaths. My phone stayed dark, no names lit the glass. A microwave down the hall hummed, clicked, and gave up. The fridge answered with a quiet growl and then settled. I turned back to the table and checked the corners again. No curls. No tears. No loose ends waiting for excuses. When doors matter, mine will open first. I slid the last sleeve into place and closed the folder. I squared the stack with my palm and pressed once. The room held still, like it agreed and wouldn't argue. I set the key on the top page and watched it stop moving. No speeches. No revenge speech. No victory pose. Just metal, paper, and a date that didn't need help. The paper cooled. The key tapped once. That was enough. The DMV doors opened, and the rope fell back into place. A man in a golf shirt got waved through without a ticket. The clerk looked over my shoulder and said, "Appointments only." I pointed to the sign that said walk-ins were allowed. She shrugged at the sign like it was a rumor. "Take a number," she said, eyes already moving past me. "Public, not private." By the end of the week, this lobby would remember me. The floor smelled like wet mat and old rubber. A digital board clicked one red number forward and then stalled. A child spun the metal post and got told to stop. I held a form against my wallet and filled neat squares. Ink sat heavy and didn't bleed into the paper. A man asked for a pen and kept mine too long. When I stood, the chain on the counter pen snapped loose. The clerk closed her window and flipped the sign to "On break." I stepped sideways so an older woman could keep her place. Not dramatic. It worked. A supervisor in a blue vest checked the line with a glance. He lifted the rope for a couple with printed confirmations. They passed without slowing, shoes soft on the tile. My number flashed and beeped. A different window opened. The glass had a scratch at eye level, thin and pale. "Identification and proof," the new clerk said, voice even. I slid documents under the gap and kept my hands quiet. She held them by the edges and read each date twice. "Sit tight," she said. "This takes a few minutes." She didn't call me sir. She didn't have to. Fax didn't need please or thank you. The copier behind her woke with heat and steady light. A stack of forms thumped into the tray and squared itself. She pressed a blue stamp that set clean and didn't smear. "Fees at the end," she said, sliding paper back. I folded the receipt once and felt the toner grit. The rope lifted for someone else while I stepped away. Small things in straight lines. Outside, heat came off the pavement like quiet breath. I drove to the bank because numbers needed company. Wells Fargo was cold enough to stiffen the sleeves. A teller counted change without glancing at the pile. I swapped bills, kept one crisp for the envelope fee. A manager smiled at a man in a sharper jacket. She didn't look at me, she didn't have to. I wrote the amount on the back of the bank slip. It went into a clear sleeve, edge pressed once. Order paid interest. By afternoon, this date would sit where it belonged. At the post office, the line made 2 turns by the bins. A sign said, "Please have forms ready," in friendly letters. The clerk at window 2 moved fast and said little. I slid a form. He weighed it with one hand. The scale creaked and then found its number. "Do you want tracking?" he asked, already reaching. "Yes," I said. "Printed," I added. The printer spit a label warm enough to bend. I smoothed it with the side of my thumb until it cooled. He stamped the corner and pushed it back without ceremony. I kept the stub and wrote the time on its underside. Nothing extra. Only useful. On the sidewalk, the air smelled like cardboard glue. I leaned against the stone and checked the edges. Staples flat. Corners square. No curl. No fuss. The key in my pocket knocked the receipt once. I let it settle and crossed to the lot. The key stayed where it belonged. I stopped by John's gallery because the fan was honest. It clicked every third turn like a metronome for patience. John watched my hands, not my face, then nodded once. "Keep originals apart," he said, voice level. He slid a gray archival folder across the table. "Don't write on them. Write around them," he added. I moved the new stack into the folder without comment. He didn't ask what the DMV had said. He looked up the stitch of the copy and the date. He tapped the corner twice and let his hand fall away. The key on the table caught a narrow band of light. The light knew where to land. So did I. Later this month, A plain folder would weigh more than talk. I left the gallery and cut behind the Civic Center. A ramp hugged the side of the building, clean and steep. Yellow-edged paint stopped short by half a shoe. Drain grates sat proud enough to catch a caster wheel. I measured distance with my step and checked the grade. The pencil line went down without tremor or flourish. No ornaments. Just use. Crosshatch here. Arrow there. Curb note in block letters. Work first. Then anything else. 2 blocks over, a glass door swung for a family of 3. Sarah carried a thin folder and kept it pressed flat. David held the door for her and looked past the inside. Mark laughed at something on his phone and didn't share. They moved toward a desk where someone stood to greet them. No one looked back at the door after it closed. I didn't knock on the glass. I didn't wave. I watched the seconds on the lobby clock and kept walking. People kept their patterns. I kept the time. Back home, the outlet hummed its thin, steady note. I washed my hands and dried them with a clean towel. The table cleared with a slow sweep of my forearm. Plastic sleeves on the left. Plastic sleeves on the right. Receipts to receipts. Copies to copies. Nothing loose. I pressed each edge once and let it seal with warmth. Bank slips behind the postal stubs, dates on the back. DMV print at the center, stamps facing up and even. No handwriting on the originals. Notes on the outside only. Rules held. I opened the gray folder and let the paper breathe. Document by document, I checked for shadows and clutter. Thread knots down. Staple legs flat, no teeth pointing up. I slid the newest DMV receipt behind the older one. Cross streets in ink, neat and plain, bottom left corner. I reached for a soft pencil and printed a single note. Not on the paper. On the sleeve. That was the point. Not loud. Precise. The room smelled like ink, paper dust, and a clean cloth. The lamp kept its promise and didn't flicker. I wrote times again where they belonged and underlined once. No fancy labels. No names beyond proper names. Facts stacked, not opinions. I touched the top corner and felt the heat leave. Paper remembered. I set the gray folder inside the brown box. The box didn't have a title on the lid or side. It didn't need one. The order was inside. I added 2 empty sleeves at the back for later. A pencil tucked along the inside edge, point up. The key lay on the table and watched the process finish. Metal doesn't blink. That helped. Simple steps, no drama. I sat on the bed edge for 5 slow breaths. A microwave down the hall hummed, clicked, and stopped. Voices in the stairwell rose, then dropped, then went quiet. AM radio tried a forecast and settled for static. I stood and opened the sketch again to the ramp. I added a note about the paint gap and the grate. 1 line for the slope. 1 arrow for the turn. I dated the sleeve and pressed the edge with my thumb. Patience paid. Someone knocked on a door down the hall and laughed once. A faucet hissed, stopped, and the pipe clicked in the wall. I closed the sketch pad and squared the stack again. No curl. No dust. No edges arguing with other edges. The key moved from the table to the top of the folder. It settled like it had a job and knew the hours. Tomorrow, a counter would see me before it saw a story. I slid the brown box into its place under the table. The floor took the weight and didn't complain. The chair leg tapped once against the wood and went still. Metal rested. Paper cooled. That was the right order tonight. The banquet doors were open, but the rope cut the room. A volunteer checked names against a glossy list and smiled past me. Family table? She asked Sarah, and pointed toward the lit center. David nodded once. A wristband snapped around his sleeve. Mark took 2 programs and kept 1 for show. My card read, "Overflow, near exit," printed in small type. A plastic tumbler waited on my chair by the wall. Public, not private. By midnight, applause would sound thinner than paper. The room smelled like chafing dish steam and lemon polish. A projector warmed up and breathed through a dusty filter. Names scrolled slow across the screen and never stopped for mine. The microphone on the stand caught light like a thin blade. A DJ tapped the grill and asked for a quick check. "Check 1, he said, as if numbers settled things. The microphone wasn't for me. Sarah adjusted the napkin ring and watched the head table. David held a glass with a slice of lime he didn't squeeze. Mark leaned into a small crowd and let them clap for him. Emily smoothed the ribbon on her dress and smiled sideways. No one looked toward the exit row unless a server passed. A server did, and asked me to scoot my chair 2 inches. Not special. Functional. The centerpiece on my table was fake hydrangea with loose glue. Theirs had water beads and a real stem cut at an angle. Steam lifted from their plates. Mine cooled under a thin draft. Plastic fork flexed. China didn't. That was the spread. I wrote the time on the back of the program. Ink sat heavy and didn't bleed through the gloss. Small lines held. The MC thanked donors in a voice that made all words equal. He laughed once at Mark's quick remark and gave him the mic. Mark didn't test it. He knew it worked for him. "This city taught us grit," he said, lifting their side first. Applause arrived on schedule from tables closest to the stage. My table clapped late and quiet, like it knew its job. Late claps mean little. The bar took a card and returned a warm receipt. I folded it once and slid it under the program. Ice hissed when it hit the drink tub by my elbow. The tub sweated onto the floor and made a small lake. I moved my shoes and gave the water somewhere else to go. Nothing extra. Only useful. Before dessert, a different room would learn new names. I stepped outside when the slideshow paused for sponsors. Heat held still along the brick like a patient animal. A 7-Eleven across the street hummed under a tired sign. I bought water and a plain coffee and took the lids. The clerk counted bills with a thumb that knew its work. I wrote the minute on the receipt and kept the pen. Truck noise from the highway rolled once and then thinned. Air was honest. I stood by the door and let the cups cool. The key in my pocket pressed against the receipt. Metal through paper. No speech needed. I put the coffee down and watched the exit light flicker. Back inside, the projector restarted with a heavy breath. I went back without asking. The DJ handed the mic to a woman with lace sleeves. She read names she could have learned before today. When she reached Sarah, the pause grew soft on purpose. Sarah stood, nodded to the proper side, and sat again. David raised a glass and didn't drink. He held the pose. Mark clapped for himself and laughed at his own echo. They enjoyed the center. I mapped the edges. A server placed salad in front of the head table, fast. He placed mine slower and left without the small smile. The croutons were damp, and the dressing separated in the cup. A child at another table asked for extra bread and got it. I asked for water and waited while the pitcher visited center first. Order traveled the room in circles. I didn't stand inside. I marked the time again at the bottom of the program. 2 digits for the hour, 2 for the minute, nothing else. I pressed the edge of the program with my thumb. Heat left the paper, then came back from the room. Paper remembered even here. A volunteer pinned a ribbon to Emily's shoulder and beamed. Emily thanked her with both hands and kept the ribbon straight. She looked toward Sarah, who was already talking to someone tall. David laughed at a joke he didn't finish hearing. Mark checked his phone while people still clapped. Patterns didn't need announcements. The main course arrived with stainless lids and careful hands. The lid near me slipped and knocked the plastic cup. Water hit the table and stayed in a cold ring. I took a napkin, folded once, and blotted the edge. The volunteer said sorry without stopping her route. I nodded without making it harder for her night. Work first. Then anything else. I noted the caterer name from the menu card corner. The print was small, the logo was bigger than fax. I copied the time under it and folded the card again. The fold sat flat. The corner didn't fight. Edges can learn. A man in a blazer took the mic with practiced fingers. He called the room to kindness and gave out thanks. He thanked Sarah for guidance and David for backbone. He thanked Mark for energy and didn't look toward me. The room agreed with him by pushing chairs back in unison. Not anger. Inventory. Out by the service door, 2 dish carts clicked over grout. A smell of sanitizer rolled with them and cleared the air. A staffer wrote numbers on masking tape and stuck them to racks. His marker squeaked, then dried, then squeaked again. He didn't see me. That helped him work faster. Quiet makes room for work. I kept my seat when Toast circled back for seconds. The projector froze on a frame where Mark looked taller. The MC laughed and blamed the cable he'd brought himself. "Keep talking," he said, and someone did, from the center. Center always finds a voice. I checked the parking stub in my jacket pocket. The timestamp matched the first photo on the program. I laid the stub under the bar receipt and pressed once. I kept the program flat and the receipts together. The key sat between fabric layers and waited its shift. Simple, steady, exact. Tomorrow, the envelope would weigh more than their toasts. A server carried a tray of champagne and raised one brow. "Non-alcoholic?" she asked, already knowing which table needed it. She gave glass to glass, and plastic to plastic. My cup was light and bent across my fingers. Bubbles rose in theirs like they had an audience. "Glass isn't a virtue. It's just glass." Sarah stepped to the mic for a closing line. She thanked the committee twice and named the chair correctly. She looked toward David and then past him at the crowd. She said community like the word paid rent for the room. Applause came on time, clean and full, then faded. She left the mic centered and straight for the photographs. I stayed where the exit breathed. The photographer waved the head table into a careful shape. Mark adjusted his jaw and checked the monitor approval. Emily stepped closer to Sarah and held her sleeve. David angled his shoulders toward the best light. They stood still the way practice people stand still. The click sounded like a small door that knows its duty. I wrote the minute and folded the program again. Outside again, the 7-Eleven cup had cooled under the ledge. Condensation drew a soft ring no one would notice. Highway noise carried low and broke once on the overpass. I drank half the water and set the cup down. Half was enough. Back in the hall, chairs scraped, promises filled the empty air. The DJ coiled the cable and checked his watch without hurry. A volunteer stacked extra programs and squared the edges. She pushed them into a box with a label that didn't boast. I slipped my copy under my jacket and buttoned once. The key pressed flat against the paper like it understood. No speeches waited for me. No permission either. I walked past the rope without holding anyone up. The volunteer lifted it a little late, then let it fall. The projector fan spun down and found a softer pitch. The mic popped once and went quiet on its stand. The door closed behind me. The ring on the table cooled. Tomorrow, a counter would see me before it saw a story. I slid the brown box into its place under the table. The floor took the weight and didn't complain. The chair leg tapped once against the wood and went still. Metal rested. Paper cooled. That was the right order tonight. The security desk waved 2 suits through with pre-printed badges. My turn came, and the guard pointed me to the tablet kiosk. "Fill it there," he said, eyes already on the next person. A receptionist stood to greet Sarah by name down the hall. David lifted his guest badge. The scanner blinked green. Mark laughed at something on his phone and kept walking. I typed my name and waited for the printer to cough. Public, not private. By noon, one letter would travel farther than their voices. The elevator smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. I pressed 4. The light stuck and didn't flicker. A glass door slid open with a soft, expensive hush. "Documents?" the assistant asked. No small talk, no decoration. I set copies on the conference table, edges already square. She lined them by date and pressed a fingernail to each staple. "We'll match these to filings and bank confirmations," she said. I placed the key by the stack. It caught a narrow stripe. The attorney walked in, sleeves plain, tie not loud. He didn't compliment the stack. He measured it with silence. Dates, signatures, certified mail, he said. Proof before conclusions. Proof first. He handed me a pen that wrote heavier than it looked. Initial here, and again where the stamp will sit. Toner warmed the room. The copier woke with a clean breath. The assistant fed pages. The machine answered with a steady rhythm. Each set came out warm enough to hold a moment. The attorney checked the notary's seal with his thumb's edge. Keep originals apart, he said, sliding me a clear folder. I didn't write on it. I wrote around it. He circled 2 lines on a bank slip and a deed memo. These dates talk to each other, he said. Keep them together. Not loud. Precise. The card reader beeped once when I paid the filing fee. The receipt curled until my palm pressed it flat. I wrote the time on the back and let it cool. The attorney pushed 3 envelopes across the table. Recorder, bank, counsel, he said. Stamped, tracked, no drama. The assistant weighed them on a small silver scale. She added one more stamp, then another, until the needle settled. She wrote tracking numbers twice, once for me, once for them. Don't email these, the attorney said. Paper wins here. Paper wins often. Downstairs, the building's lobby replaced voices with shoe noise. A delivery cart rattled over a seam in the tile. I crossed the street to the UPS store for the counter. The clerk wore a name tag turned backward and didn't fix it. Certified with return receipt, I said. Printed confirmations, please. He printed labels that came out warm and a little curved. I smoothed them with the side of my thumb until they cooled. The date stamped clean in the corner, no bounce, no smear. He slid the card for signatures to the top of the stack. I signed where the arrow sticker told me to sign. Nothing extra. Only useful. By evening, a stamped envelope would speak in my place. Wells Fargo was 2 blocks south, cold enough to bite. A teller in a red tie counted 5s into a band. I handed a deposit slip and the copy under it. He matched the name, then the memo line, then the date. He nodded at the small number and didn't comment. Do you need a cashier's check for fees? He asked. Yes, I said. Make it exact to the line. The printer hummed. The check came out with clean edges. I pressed it between 2 receipts until the warmth left. Numbers belonged with numbers. On the sidewalk, someone's lunch smelled like fryer oil. A 7-Eleven sign clicked between greens without picking a side. I bought water, took the lid, and wrote the minute. The clerk counted change by feel and didn't look up. The bottle sweated, the paper didn't. That was the point. Small pressure. Big effect. At the crosswalk, a family paused for a photo in the sun. Emily's ribbon stayed straight. Sarah fixed the hair that didn't move. David held a bag with the print facing the camera. Mark checked the background and asked for one more shot. They laughed at something that didn't concern the curb. The signal changed. I crossed with the second beep. No one turned toward the post office door where I stepped in. People kept their patterns. I kept the time. Inside, the clerk weighed each envelope and set them aside. Do you want insurance? He asked, already reaching for the form. Tracking is enough, I said. Delivery confirmation on all 3. He stamped, slid, and stacked them in a neat, practiced order. A printer spit a thin strip of barcodes and dates. He tore it free without tearing the numbers and handed it over. I folded it once and tucked it behind the bank receipt. The counter smelled like glue and fresh paper. The tape gun snapped twice and rested. Work first. Then anything else. Back at John's gallery, the fan clicked every 3rd sweep. He didn't ask what the attorney had said. He looked at the envelopes as if they were already stories. He tapped the corner of the gray folder, once, then twice. Don't chase their words, he said. Make them chase your paper. I nodded and moved the originals into the folder. He didn't touch the key. He watched the light find it. Quiet pays, he said, and let the door sigh behind me. Quiet paid today. At home, the outlet hummed its thin, dependable line. I cleared the table and set down the day's stack. Receipts on the left, tracking strip face up, numbers clean. Certified slips in the center, signatures blank and waiting. Copies on the right, thread knots down, staples flat. I wrote the times again where they belong, no adjectives. The gray folder opened and took the new weight without complaint. The box under the table took the folder and didn't slide. Order held. I printed 2 short cover notes without anything fancy. Names correct. Addresses spelled. Dates where dates belong. I checked the spelling twice, then once more slowly. I signed with a pen that didn't skip or shout. I pressed each envelope edge with the pad of my thumb. Heat left, paper cooled, the seal took in silence. Paper remembered. The phone buzzed once with a message I didn't open. Street noise climbed, then fell, then evened out. A neighbor's faucet clicked the pipe, and then rested. I placed John's card on top of the gray folder. Your true inheritance is your talent, it still said. I didn't read it out loud. I left it working. Not prayers. Procedures. A truck braked outside and hissed at the curb. I watched the minute change on the stove's green clock. I wrote that minute by the bank slip's corner. Small lines made big lines possible. I put the receipts together and pressed once more. Small pressure. Big effect. Tomorrow they would walk in smiling. Tomorrow they would walk out served. I set the key on the stack and let it cool the page. Metal on paper, weight on weight, nothing theatrical. I laid the tracking strip under the corner of the card. The numbers peeked out and kept their shape. I closed the box with one slow, even motion. No tape, no label, no invitation for anyone curious. Lower was smarter. At the door, I tested the deadbolt and didn't rush it. The hallway smelled like laundry and someone's cheap cologne. A neighbor passed with a pizza box and nodded once. The stairwell light buzzed, then settled into a steady hum. I stood still until the hum became part of the room. I went back to the table and squared the stack again. No curls. No tears. No edges arguing with other edges. When doors matter, mine would open first. I turned off the lamp and waited for the click. The envelopes lay flat. The key tapped once. That was enough. The conference room door stayed open for people with surnames first. A coordinator called Sarah by name and walked her to the center. David received a poured glass before anyone asked his choice. Mark got a folder and a chair with a better view. My badge had a number. The printer miscut the corner. I stood until someone pointed at the last seat by the wall. Public, not private. By afternoon, ink would speak louder than anyone. The tables smelled like toner and lemon wipes. A speakerphone blinked red in the middle and waited. A legal pad lay flat where I set my receipts. The clerk stacked documents in 3 piles by date. He read titles slow and left verbs where they belong. Recorded, he said. Filed, received, confirmed. Nothing extra. Paper does the talking. Sarah folded her hands and watched the midpoint of the table. David adjusted a cuff that didn't need adjusting. Mark checked his phone under the folder's edge and hid a smile. Emily traced the ring of condensation near her water. No one touched my side. That helped the order hold. Small space, clear use. The attorney slid a copy toward the clerk for the record. He kept the originals under his left hand steady, plain. Dates line up, he said, without looking at anyone. Bank confirmations match the memo fields and signature pages. He pointed with the cap of his pen, not the pen. The clerk nodded and put a paperclip where it should live. Order first. He read the first number, then the second, then paused. He checked the stamp impression against the tracking strip print. He held both to the light and found no bleed. He said the address out loud and spelled the street. He spelled my name last and didn't ask how to say it. Names are easier on paper. I kept my voice slow and my answers shorter than questions. Yes, I said. That was hand-delivered with receipt. Yes, I said. Those copies were witnessed and returned. Yes, I said. Originals are stored separate and undamaged. I didn't add stories. I didn't ask for thanks. Not humility. Design. Sarah cleared her throat and half raised a hand. The attorney waited. The clerk didn't lift his eyes. David leaned back and let his chair say the rest. Mark looked at Emily, then away, then at the wall. No one wanted to speak first and be quoted. Silence has weight. The attorney placed a small stack in front of me. These are yours, he said. These remain with the file. He tapped a page where 2 signatures lived too close. He traced the loop where a date had been rewritten. He didn't say fraud. He didn't need to. Facts carry their own verbs. Across the hall, a printer jam thumped, and then released. The coordinator apologized to nothing and kept her schedule moving. A card rattled past with boxes labeled by month only. March had 2 boxes. June had 3. August waited empty. The air conditioner found a colder setting and held it. Rooms tell on people. Midway through, the clerk read a line that changed the room. When the clerk read the number, the room changed. Sarah blinked once slower than usual. David pressed his lips thin and looked past the glass. Mark leaned toward the clerk's copy, then leaned back. Emily fixed the water ring with a napkin and changed nothing. The attorney asked for the next page without raising his voice. No hurry. No drift. We broke for 5 minutes to sign in the margins. I stepped into the hallway where the carpet muted shoes. I drank from a paper cone and watched the second hand. A 7-Eleven cup sat in the trash with the lid off. The vending machine whirred and stopped 1 square before delivery. Someone hit the button twice, nothing else fell. Machines keep rules. So do records. Back in the room, the clerk read the final confirmations. He placed the return receipts on top of the matched pages. The attorney squared the edges and removed any curl. We'll circulate the findings and log acknowledgments today, he said. He looked at Sarah, then David, then no one. This will control immediate possession and further access. Plain road. No detours. Sarah asked if there was room for reconsideration later. The attorney said reconsideration lived in facts, not feelings. David asked about timelines and whether weekends counted. The clerk answered with numbers he didn't have to invent. Mark asked if there was any informal solution available. The attorney said informal hadn't served anyone here so far. They wanted air. We were working with paper. I opened my folder and took out John's card. Your true inheritance is your talent, the print still said. I set the card on my stack so the line showed. I didn't lift it for effect. I let them see it. The key touched the card's edge and kept still. Metal shuts arguments down. We reviewed one last item, access logs the bank supplied. Swipes matched entries. Entries matched the earlier deposit slips. No midnight movement. No mystery visits. No helpful accidents. The clerk underlined the time that followed the printed date. Direct match, he said. He didn't add adjectives. Enough was enough. The coordinator brought a tray of water and chose who received glass. Sarah and David got glass and a napkin underneath. Mark received glass and a second napkin to be safe. A paper cup came my way with the tray already turning. I held it by the top and avoided the weak seam. Distances never needed announcements. We signed acknowledgement pages with the plain pen again. The clerk stamped each signature block with a flat, honest sound. He stacked the stamps themselves in a quiet, useful row. He wrote the minute in the corner of the log sheet. He slid the sheet forward and didn't push it hard. Details held the room. I checked the watch face I wore when Ruth was alive. The glass had a nick at the two that never spread. I heard Ruth say keep the truth and didn't speak. I kept the truth under my hand and let it do work. I didn't look up for someone's approval to exist. Not pride. Enough. We moved to the door for the final distribution. Badges went into a bin that ate plastic with a click. Folders went into hands that had practiced taking things. Mine went into a bag I had kept square for years. The key stayed in my palm and left a small mark. Marks fade. Records don't. At the elevator, Emily looked like she wanted a different script. She didn't say anything that could be quoted later. She stepped in with Sarah and David and looked down. Mark stayed outside and pretended to answer a message. Doors closed. The floor number changed without hurry. People choose pace. Paper sets pace. I walked to the street and let the sun decide tone. A Ford F-150 idled by the curb with the window cracked. The driver drummed 3 times and then stopped on his own. Across the boulevard, the courthouse flag didn't move. I crossed with the second chirp and kept my folder level. The wind tried once and gave up. Steady paid again. I stopped at John's gallery before heading home. The fan clicked in the back and kept its own count. I unlocked the side cabinet and placed the folder inside. The key turned once and didn't argue about it. I closed the cabinet and watched the strip of light narrow. I let it close completely and kept my hands still. The circle closed quietly. When the door clicked last, nothing else would matter. Evening brought heat off the asphalt and a thin chemical smell. I bought a black coffee from the corner stand without sugar. The lid fit better than most and didn't leak. I wrote the minute on the back of the receipt. I folded it once and slid it behind the card. Small lines, large results. At home, I laid the folder on the table. I set the card on top where the line could breathe. I placed the key across the print and watched it rest. The fridge motor changed tone and then found level again. Neighbors moved a chair upstairs and then stopped moving things. I pressed the folder flat with my palm and held it. No speeches left to give. The room kept the sound it needed and dropped the rest. The key touched wood and answered with a small tap. That was the final word. Tomorrow, a new chapter. What was louder, the key, the glass, the receipt, or the silence?